In the injection molding process, setup time is required when switching items and molds. Because setups are usually performed by workers, we need to consider constraints in terms of the work time periods of workers and the number of workers. I will also explain about how to reduce the number of setups in order to increase production efficiency. First, let's add an integrated master for new molded item Product 2. This item is manufactured by combining Component 3 and Component 4. Mold 1 is used to mold Component 3. Mold 2 is used to mold Component 4. The setup of molding processes is done by workers, not machines. Worker is set as a sub-resource for Component 1, Component 2, Component 3, and Component 4. We set the instruction code to S2, assigning it simultaneously to molds and workers. We set 0 in the setup field for all equipment. Once 0 has been set, the setup time is calculated based on the setup time set in the setup table. Since workers are assigned only for setup, we do not set them for production. In the item table, we set the auto-replenish flag, injection pressure, and display color of Product 2, Component 3, and Component 4. Lastly, we add 4 manufacturing orders for Product 2 in the order table. Let's reschedule. We have successfully created a schedule that takes into account Product 2. Since we didn't set anything in the setup table, there are no setups at present. For injection molding machine injection, 120 minutes of setup are required to switch molded parts. The setup for switching molded parts is set in the item setup table. Let's reschedule and check. When the item to be manufactured changes, the 120 minutes of setup are assigned. For the molding machine, 120 minutes of setup are required to switch molds. The setup time for switching molds is set in the resource setup table. Switching the molded parts and molds at the same time takes a total of 240 minutes of setup. Let's reschedule. When switching the molds of the molding machine, 120 minutes of setup are assigned. 240 minutes of setup are required when switching both molded parts and molds. The number of setups by the workers is a total of 10. The working time of workers is from morning until evening. Therefore, setups can be done only during the period from morning until evening. We register the shifts of workers in the shift table. In the calendar table, we set the working schedule of the workers. Let's make the resource quantity 1. This means that 1 worker is available for performing setups. When the number of workers is just 1 person, setups cannot be performed for 2 or more molding machines at the same time. Let's reschedule. Only 1 setup can be performed at the same time as the work time period of a worker. Therefore, setups for switching molds and molded parts cannot be carried out, and a number of operations are falling behind. Further, there is a location where a setup is interrupted and is scheduled to be resumed the next day. Since setups cannot be interrupted at night, we do not allow interrupts that last more than 60 minutes. Let's reschedule. The setup of more than 60 minutes has disappeared. The worker performs a total of 9 setups. Let's adjust the scheduling parameters to reduce the number of setups. We want to adjust the scheduling parameters so as to lower the number of setups as much as possible. We seek to assign operations taking into consideration the minimization of setup time and giving priority to the same item in terms of resource evaluation. Let's reschedule. Item switching and mold switching have been reduced, and the number of setups has been lowered to just 3 times. In this way, you can create schedules that take into account setups when switching items and molds. Furthermore, it is possible to quickly perform difficult scheduling that takes into account constraints such as the work time periods of workers and the number of workers.